thank you so much again for joining me on this channel. As always, I'm very grateful for all your previous views, likes, subscriptions and shares. You may notice a couple of differences. I'm very fortunate to have acquired a brand new camera, and secondly, I do have this slightly odd 1980s soft focus power ballad video lighting going on at the moment. I'm not sure if I'll stick with it. We'll just see how it goes. Far more importantly is the video, which of course is about Islam and the concept of jihad. So I began by doing my favourite trick on Google and looking up what the word means. And in Arabic, the word jihad means effort. And some synonyms for that, which very handily alliterate and make it easier for me to remember, are strive and struggle. And I think that's really interesting because it tells us something about the origins of the word in terms of how it can be applied to Islam today. Now, before we dig deep into what jihad means, there is something which you may have noticed when it comes across to definitions, and particularly in older sources, sometimes jihad is incorrectly referred to as the sixth pillar of Islam. There are only 5 pillars of Islam, but that is not to say there isn't a diversity of opinion or tradition in Islam. So, for example, there are 2 groups, Sunni and Shia, that you may have heard about. Interestingly enough, in 12er Shia Islam, jihad is one of the practices of the religion. Now, 12er Shia Islam is a little subcategory of Shia Islam, and they have a list of practices of the religion, in which jihad is one of them. So maybe in your own research, you want to look up and find out what exactly are those practices of the religion and how many of them are there. But let's get back specifically to jihad. And there are 2 types of jihad. There's what's known as the greater jihad, or inner jihad is sometimes referred to. And this is attitudinal. This is all about one's attitude to the Islamic faith. And some examples of this might be a Muslim striving or making the effort to learn the Quran off by heart to become a Hafiz. It might be forgiving someone who's wronged them, or sacrificing what is valuable to you. I think a good way of thinking about it is think about those 5 pillars of Islam. Well, jihad can sort of bind them all together, and this is perhaps where that misunderstanding of the 6th pillar came from. Bind them all together. It's about making the effort, okay, to recite and remember the Shahada, to actually make sure you are doing your 5 prayers in Salah, to have a positive attitude during Sawm and fasting, to make sure when you give you 2.5% of your wealth through zakat, to have that right attitude, and of course to be willing to open to get closer to Allah on the Hajj. So think about how that great jihad, it is all about your attitude. The second type of jihad is known as the military jihad, or lesser jihad. This isn't the best photo, admittedly. Looks like they're trying to do a fist bump. I was trying to find some warring fists. But the military jihad or lesser jihad, well, there's a clue in its title, lesser jihad. And it is an example where, in certain situations, it may be acceptable to use violence. But the whole purpose of a military jihad is to bring peace. So it might be in self-defense, where there is no other option. It might be in the defense of a nation that's being invaded. Or it might be to fight against a particularly cruel or tyrannical government. Now, there are some very strong rules that govern a military jihad, and something which is really interesting, and perhaps the second thing you might want to do in your own research and studies, is to think about how you could compare and contrast it with the Christian just war theory. Look at the similarities, look at the differences. What do you notice? But I really want to underscore that there's a very strict rule in terms of jihad, the military jihad. And of course, isn't it interesting? It is called the lesser jihad. The great jihad is the striving and the struggle to be a good Muslim. So, inevitably, there has to be a film reference with me. And I want to tell you about one of my favourites, which is The Empire Strikes Back from 1980, part of the Star Wars franchise. This little green fellow is Yoda. He is a Jedi Master. And in Empire Strikes Back, he trains Luke Skywalker to be a Jedi Knight. And there's a wonderful sequence where in the Dagobah system, in this swampy planet, he tells Luke a little bit about his who his father was in terms of his background, and also talks about that struggle to be a Jedi to make sure you don't succumb to the dark side. What then happens is that Luke then sort of wanders off into a cave and he faces off with Darth Vader. But actually, it's not the real Darth Vader. It's not an example of the military jihad at all. And what happens, it's a vision or a dream or perhaps some symbolism of the struggle within Luke himself. And what he does is that he decapitates this Darth Vader, and their head falls to the floor, and the mask breaks open, and what we see is Luke's face. Okay, the actual actor Mark Hamill himself actually filmed this by putting his head up through the stage floor, and they put the mask on him. What we see is Luke Skywalker's face, and it's Luke's struggle to be a Jedi is an example of the Great Jihad. Okay, so in the same way that a Muslim may struggle and strive to adhere to the 5 pillars, we have Luke here struggling and striving to be a good Jedi. It's a really wonderful piece of cinema that actually highlights a fantastic truth inside the Islamic faith. And I think actually that's really important to also finish with thinking a little bit about what does the Quran and Hadith say about jihad. Well, one of my favourite quotes that I found is from the Hadith, which is a collection of sayings by Muhammad. And it simply says this: the warrior who truly fights for God's cause is he who looks after a widow or a poor person. I think that sums it up beautifully. It's about social justice. It's about making sure the most vulnerable in society are cared for. And think about the early life of Muhammad as well. He was raised as an orphan, okay, and he knew some of the hardships as well. So one of the things that you might want to do in your own studies and research is to have a look at what other quotes can you find about jihad in the Quran and the Hadith. As always, thank you so much for watching, and as always, enjoy your learning.